Thank you all so much for coming. Today, we gather on Lenape Hoking land on the island of Manhattan. We acknowledge our presence today to humbly gather on the ancestral lands of the Lenape people. Thank you. My name is Deborah Nee, and I am the co-founder and chairperson of the Food and Racial Equity Collective at NYU. We are here today to celebrate this beautiful and important book, Farming While Black, Soulfire Farm's Practical Guide to Liberation on the Farm. I want to take a moment to thank our co-sponsors, the Wagner Food Policy Alliance, the NYU Food Studies Department, the Center for Multicultural Education and Programs at NYU, and the Association for the Study of Food and Society. A special thank you to the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, who is generously providing the live stream of this talk. I also want to especially thank Claudia Navas for all your work helping to bring this event together. Before I introduce our amazing speaker, just a couple things to note. After the presentation, there will be time for audience Q&A moderated by another student in our group. And we are taking questions ahead of time on social media. So if you have Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, use the hashtag FarmingWBlackNYU. It should be in your programs and also on the back. So use that hashtag and we will find your question. If we have time, we'll also pass the mic for those of you in the room who might not be on social media. And after all of that wraps, there will be time to purchase the book and speak with Leah then as well. Okay. Leah Penniman has over 20 years of experience as a soil steward and food sovereignty activist. She has worked with farmers internationally in Ghana, Haiti, and Mexico. She co-founded Soulfire Farm in 2011 with the mission to reclaim the inherent right to belong to the earth and have agency in the food system. Her areas of leadership at Soulfire include farmer training, international solidarity, food justice organizing, writing, speaking, making it rain, and anything that involves heavy lifting, sweat, and soil. Welcome, Leah Penniman.
And then at the count of 3, we're gonna burst it out and spread love all over everybody. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Yes! That's how I feel. I'm so happy to be here with everybody. This mic is a little funny. We're gonna make it work. Hi, I'm Leah. Happy to be here with you all. I'm very, 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 very grateful that we acknowledge that we're on Lenape lands. I also want to call in my comrades from the Stockbridge Muncie Mohican Nation, which is the land that our farm is on. We're about 4 hours north of here in snowy, mountainous, rocky upstate New York. And the Stockbridge Muncie were forced off of that land in the late 1800s, moved in with the Oneida for a minute in western New York, and then were kicked out of there and moved to Wisconsin. And I feel really, really blessed that there's a few members of the tribal community who have been in alliance with us, received food in our share. I'm going to be on the reservation in Wisconsin next month, and we're talking about land sharing. Because while I think it's really important to name whose land we're on, that should be the first step in actually working towards rematriation, reparations, healing of the genocidal tendencies of colonization. And that means tangibly, what do y'all need? Whether it's blocking a pipeline or giving land back or paying voluntary tax. So we're in conversation with Mohican folks. So just want to bring that into the room as well as our ancestors, of course. So I got seeds in my hair for a reason. And every time we talk about Farming While Black in the book, we bring in the central narrative, the central story, which is rooted in our ancestors. If we go back to the 16 and 1700s in Dahomey region of West Africa, the grandmothers there were so super smart. They had so much foresight because as they watched people getting kidnapped all around them, getting rounded up for their agricultural expertise and shipped off to an uncertain future across the big, wide, gaping ocean, They weren't crying, they weren't sniveling, they weren't hopeless. You know, what they did is they gathered up their okra, their cowpea, their millet, their sorghum, right? They gathered up the goosey melon, the pelargonium, and they braided all of those seeds into their hair. Because no matter where they were going, that was the insurance that they needed. That was hope in an uncertain future. So I want to call in those ancestral grandmothers and our own lineage. The name is Susie Boyd. And I also want to invite you to think of an ancestor that sacrificed for you, that had foresight for you to exist where you are today. Because none of us got here by ourselves. And at the count of 3, we're going to say that ancestor's name really loud, like we mean it, so they can hear us and they know how much we love them. 1, 2, 3. Ashe. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I also want to call into the room my team. Sometimes we get real confused in the movement and we get into this weird, like, individualistic celebrity activism thing, and we think that one person can change the world. That never happens. We always change the world together. So among many, many hundreds of people on our team, I just want to shout out Larissa, Damaris, Letitia, Amani, Emmett, Jonah, Cheryl. These are the people who make Soulfire run. And I'm sure whatever projects you're all in, it's a collective as well. We have to remember and honor that, even as I tell stories. So, speaking of stories, we're going to go on a little journey together through history. And the reason that we're going to go on a journey through history is because we actually have no idea who we are or where we're going, and we don't know where we're coming from. Marcus Garvey talks about that. It would be a rootless tree if we didn't know our history. And I'm going to put forth in this history that the food system is working perfectly, exactly as it was designed. It was designed on stolen lands and exploited labor, and designed to concentrate benefits in the hands of a few and give the harms to the rest. So we're going to look at how that came to be, but don't worry, it won't all be depressing. We're going to look at how that came to be, how that went through history, and then take some time to understand how the work we're all doing right now builds on a legacy of resistance. What is hopeful? What's actionable? What's happening? And how does that build on this legacy of resistance? So let's start with the history, though. I mentioned our grandmothers braiding seeds into their hair, and I want to shout out my amazing womb sister, Leah Penniman, who made this beautiful painting to honor those moments. So here we have the seeds, right? The okra, the molokia, the cotton, the melon, the amara kale. But it wasn't only seeds that were braided into our hair. Anyone here ever get their hair braided by their mother, auntie, grandma, older sister? What do you do while you're braiding? Talk. That's how we pass on cultural knowledge. That's how we pass on history. It's how we pass on story, right? So while these seeds were getting braided, we were also getting our cultural knowledge, and a lot of that was environmental knowledge. How do you test the soil with your tongue to tell pH? The Yoruba can do that. They can tell the difference between 6.5 and 6.0 pH by the sourness of the soil. Right? How do you build the soil like rings of a tree with dark, dark bone char and food scraps so that you can measure the age of a community down 700 years by how many layers there are, because everybody's contributing in every generation? That's what they would talk about, right? How do you preserve your food? Take a tomato, a fresh tomato, and put it in a box of sifted ash so that 6 months later it's still fresh. This is what we talk about. It's what we pass on. Building terraces, building polycultures and permacultures, raised beds, collective work parties, credit unions, how to honor the ancestors and the earth in festival, how to rotate your cows in amongst your rice and so that you have a fertility cycle going, and how to have a fallow. All of these technologies were being passed in the braids. Our people were experts, right? Absolutely experts. But the project of colonization, the project of white supremacy, the project of capitalism, is not just to steal everything, it's also to force the forgetting. To force forgetting. So what do we have here? This was what I'll call like the primal, the original sin of colonization. What is this image?
Pilgrims.
Manifest destiny. We have some history majors. What is manifest destiny? Yes.
White people were ordained
Exactly. And who is retreating in the wake of Lady Manifest Destiny?
The natives, indigenous people,
And
buffalo.
buffalo, the whole ecosystem. So this is an 1800, pretty famous 1800s painting, but this idea of manifest destiny is actually older than that. It was originally called the Doctrine of Discovery. The first evidence we have of it is in 1455 when Pope Nicholas put out one of those scrolls. It's called the Papal Bull. You know, they pull it out and they read it. Kyrie, one of those. So what it said in 1455 is, white Christian nations, you have the authority of the church to go forth, colonize, enslave, and pillage heathen, non-Christian, non-white nations. So this was the beginning of the Age of Discovery. The Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, 1492, all that stuff. Right? That was the beginning of that. So under the authority of God, right? This has been nicknamed the Finders Keepers Law. The idea that if you are white Christian and you put your flag somewhere, it's yours. And it's been upheld by the Supreme Court many, many times over history. First time in 1823, the Supreme Court said, you know, Native folks, we don't have to really honor those treaties because finders keepers. All throughout history, the most recent time in 2005, in our very own New York State, the Supreme Court struck down, or the Supreme Court went against the United Nations petition to reclaim some of their ancestral territories in Western New York, and they brought forth the Doctrine of Discovery. They said the United Nation is a domestic dependent nation, does not have rights to its territories. So again, not old news. The land was never given back and it keeps being stolen. That's part of the DNA of the food system. And then the second strand in that double helix is stolen labor. Does anyone know what this picture represents?
Africans getting enslaved in Africa to be put on boats.
Exactly. So we have 12.5 million people who made it across, right? Many, many others who drowned, you know, in the ocean, who are now swallowed and returned to the earth. And people were not just captured because they had strong muscles. Right? Where did Europeans do their agriculture before they came over to the quote-unquote New World? Europe. What's it like there?
Cold.
It's cold. Any cotton?
Nope.
Sugar?
Nope.
Tobacco?
Nope.
Rice?
Nope. Potatoes.
Wait, who knew how to do that kind of tropical agriculture?
Africans.
Africans and indigenous folks, right? And so people were kidnapped. Slavers knew to get the very best farmers, get a good price for the very best farmers, and take that knowledge. And that's what built $10 trillion of wealth, of agricultural wealth in this country, was the genius, was the expertise of enslaved African farmers. But we're cool, right? Because 1865 happens. What happened in 1865?
Emancipation.
What's the 13th Amendment say?
We are free.
Except?
Yeah.
Yes. Your 13th Amendment says you are no more slavery, except in the case of you're convicted of a crime. So the South is freaking out right now because all that labor is suddenly free. The economy is going to collapse, right? So what they did is they created a new set of laws called the Black Codes. The Black Codes, for the first time, you see things like loitering on the book. Loitering means hanging out. Vagrancy, not having a job, not taking your hat off, not getting off the sidewalk for a white person, not being upright and honest. Then your children would actually get taken away from you. That was the beginning of social services. And they'd be apprenticed back to their former masters who were more honest and upright to raise the children. So the prisons would conveniently fill with black folks at harvest time because the state had a convict leasing policy where they would rent people back out to the plantations, the mines, and the railroads. Right? So slavery continued in a different form. And this was not a minor footnote in history. Alabama in the late 1860s, 73% of their total state budget came from convict leasing of black people back to plantations. So this was a major, major economic driver. And the mortality rate was higher, right? How do you treat a rented place versus a place you own? Or believe you own, right? And so mortality was very high. It was up to 25% in some of those mines because the people were seen as a disposable resource. And of course, folks who weren't back on the plantations because of convict leasing were also on the plantations because why?
Sharecroppers.
Because they were sharecroppers, right? That whole 40 acres and a mule thing, that was a brilliant idea that actually came from Reverend Fraser and 30 other black ministers met with the head of the Union Army, General Sherman, and General Sherman, to his credit, said, what do y'all need now that you're free? What would be helpful? Imagine. They said some lands and at least one generation of a separate community from white people, because we think it will take them a generation to rid themselves of hatred. That's what they asked for. And so General Sherman started trying to round up land, and when the president heard about it, he was like, no, give the land back to the people who literally took up arms against the US government. Give the land back to them because we can't have black folks owning their own land. So sharecropping, which is a debt peonage system, was the predominant way that black folks continued to farm. So now we're in early 1900s, right? And again, why we're telling you all this is because the whole food system is built on stolen land and stolen labor, and we're going to see throughout this history that that hasn't really shifted. So, black people are genius and amazing and hardworking. So despite all this, they're like saving their pocket money to buy land. The freemen, when they met, they said, what we need is homes. We need homes and the ground underneath them so that we can plant a fruit tree and say to our child, this is yours. That was what they were going for. They purchased 16 million acres of farmland. That's 14% of the farms in the country. Black people only made up 9% of the people. 14% of the farms by 1910. Astounding, astounding. But of course, then we have another round of freak out from the white folks. They're like, wait, we're trying to do this sharecropping thing. They're over here buying their land. We can't have that. Right? So this was the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. This was the rise of the White Citizens Council. This was the rise of terrorism on the soil. 4,500 people, most of whom were either attempting to or actually owning lands, were lynched. Houses burned, people strung up. And that's a very, very big number, and I just want to read you a little excerpt about one of those people to humanize such a big number like 4,500. So this is about David Walker, black farmer in Hickman, Kentucky. After midnight on October 4th, 1908, 50 hooded white men surrounded the home of a black farmer in Hickman, Kentucky and ordered him to come out for a whipping. When David Walker refused and shot at them instead, the mob poured coal oil on his house and set it afire, according to contemporary newspaper accounts. Pleading for mercy, Walker ran out the front door, followed by 4 screaming children and his wife carrying a baby in her arms. The mob shot them all, wounding 3 children and killing the others. Walker's oldest son never escaped the burning house. No one was ever charged with the killings, and the surviving children were deprived of the farm their father died defending. Land records show that Walker's 2.5-acre farm was simply folded into the property of a neighbor. The neighbors soon sold it to another man whose daughter owns that very same undeveloped farm today in 2019. Anyone heard of the Great Migration? What was that?
Jobs in the north, black folks went to the jobs because it was less stressful than being in the south and racial oppression. They thought they had a de facto freedom.
Okay, teach. So 6 million people moved to the north. Black people moved to the north. It's the largest internal migration, right, in this country. And I was always taught that too, is factory jobs and opportunities. What I realized in this studying is there was a refugee crisis. People were fleeing for their very lives, right? So folks leave, and in the vacuum, the labor vacuum, again, the South has a third try to be like, this whole stolen labor thing, that's old. We're gonna do something different. But instead, they try to figure out who is the next population to exploit. And who is it? The Bracero program in 1940. It actually, I was corrected that the very first guest worker program in the late 1800s was Filipino workers and other South Asians. But over time it's been, how do we find people who are in a situation of desperation, often because of our policies, right? So that they will leave behind their land, leave behind their families, and come work for sub-minimum wage in really challenging working conditions to do work that many Americans with papers will not do. So the Bracero program, right now, 85% of our food is grown by people who speak Spanish and were born outside of the so-called borders of the United States. So it has become the very foundation. Which maybe would be okay if it wasn't for the insidious problem that we have two Americas when it comes to our labor laws. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he was like the original New Deal person, not the Green New Deal person, right? So the original New Deal, what did it do for us? Some of it.
Social Security, 8-hour workday, unionization.
Exactly. Worker protections for the first time, child labor protections, the right to unionize, all of that. So at the time they were creating this though, it was supposed to include everybody, but the Southern Democrats, because the parties were switched then, would not vote for it if it benefited black and brown people. They would block the whole New Deal package. And so they created an exclusion clause. So agricultural workers and domestic workers who were black and brown people, that was the jobs we had, were excluded. To this day, if you look at the National Labor Relations Act text, still excluded. So if you're a farm worker in this country, you have a different minimum wage. In fact, you have no minimum wage if you work in a farm with less than 7 people. No right to overtime. No right to a day off in 7.
No right to breaks.
No right to breaks, exactly. Children as young as 12 can leave school and go work on the farms. And so we have two completely separate sets of labor laws for arguably the most important profession, which is feeding like the population. Right? So while all this is going on and the labor is shifting, it's not like black farmers just gave up, right? A lot of people stayed in the South. A lot of people fought for their lands. And in addition to the enemy of white supremacist terrorism, the federal government itself was blocking. Right? Does anyone know what the Farm Bill does? What's the Farm Bill about? It's like the biggest piece of legislation in this country. If you don't know about the Farm Bill, definitely check it out. It's like a $9 billion, it's huge, huge, huge. It controls all the nutrition programs, like SNAP, EBT, the school breakfast, as well as everything agriculture. So it provides crop insurance, crop allotments, different kinds of subsidies, technical assistance to farmers. And it's an entitlement program. If you're a farmer, you're supposed to get a piece of that. There's a lot of things wrong with the Farm Bill, but one of the things is that since the early 1900s, when they started doing these programs for farmers, black people got almost nothing from it. So you would, go up to the FHA loan office. There's been a drought for 2 years. You put in your application to get irrigation, like a loan for irrigation. Delayed, denied, ignored, come back tomorrow. And during the civil rights movement, this got extra bad. Because you would go, and they'd say, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Walker, did I hear that you tried to register to vote yesterday? Well, my, I don't think I have anything for you. And so Pete Daniel writes a book called Dispossession about this that you should definitely check out that records. But it got so bad that by the 1980s, the US Commission of Civil Rights said the federal government would have the blood of the extinction of the black farmer on their hands. They were the #1 cause of the decline of the black farmer. From 14% in 1910 to 1% in 1990. From the denial of the loans and support and eventual foreclosure. So what this is happening right now is this is protest. It's smart protest though. They ended up filing a lawsuit against the federal government in 1999. Pigford v. Glickman was settled for $2 billion. It's the largest civil rights settlement in the history of the United States in favor of the black farmers. Most of the farmers were 90 at that point. Their land was gone. The average payout was $50,000. So it was a symbolic victory, but an important one nonetheless, to uproot that myth that folks just walked off their land because they wanted to. And then we get up here to the north, and racism has a different face. It's confusing kind of racism up here. People don't just burn something on your lawn. It's like, why didn't I get that apartment? I don't know. Why didn't I get to that school? Right? It's just a different flavor of racism. So also in the 1930s, whole new set of housing laws came out. So we have the Federal Housing Administration. They commissioned these maps to be made. The maps ranked neighborhoods from A to D. Redlining. So D is undesirable, unfit for lending, black and brown neighborhoods. They put red lines around them. Banks would not lend. You cannot get a mortgage, right? At the same time, they put out zoning recommendations. The zoning is designed to prevent the intermixing of inharmonious racial groups. In fact, I just bought a piece of land a couple weeks ago, long story why that happened, but there was still in the deed a little clause that it could only be sold to white people. And the lawyer was like, oh, don't worry, we're required to scratch that out when we see it. It's still there, it's still there. But so even though since 1977, technically it's illegal to discriminate, we all know, the damage is done because 80% of wealth is inherited. Almost all of that is property. And so we have right now a 16-to-1 wealth gap between white and black. And that's at birth. That's not like you earned your 16-to-1. I'm saying at birth, a white child has on average 16 times as much wealth as a black child. And that's because of this. That's because when the GI Bill came and they gave out 67,000 mortgages just in this area, 70 went to people of color. That is why we have, even when you're in an urban area, this dispossession of lands, right? That's why you have the food deserts, the food apartheid neighborhoods, underinvested, because the wealth was never there, because it never could be that you could never own anything. So we have this wonderful young person. Where is she spending some time right now? Pantry. If you're a black child, there's a 1 in 3 chance that you're going to bed hungry tonight. If you're a white child, it's a 1 in 6 chance. Both are egregious, but one house is blazing on fire. If you are a black indigenous in America, you're more likely to have diabetes, heart disease, obesity, poor eyesight, depression, ADHD, all of these diet-related illnesses. Not because you don't know how to cook or eat. You know these things. It's because of access. It's because if you have $2 or $3 in your pocket and all you can do is get to a corner store and get some hot Cheetos and blue drink, right? That's not going to give you what you need in order to live a healthy life, live a strong, long and healthy life. We talked about the farm workers already, and we talked about the lands. This is the last census. 98% of the land is owned by white people. That's more than ever in the history of this country. So again, wealth concentrates, wealth feeds itself. It doesn't correct itself unless you have reparations and redistribution. And to bring it back to the beginning too, about our ancestral grandmothers braiding seeds in their hair and knowledge about earth, we can talk a lot about the social impacts of a racist food system built on stolen land and stolen labor. But that extends also into the way we're treating the planet, extractive and commodified. So agriculture is the #1 driver of climate change, water withdrawals, land use conversions, and almost any other measure of environmental impact. The food we eat is the #1 way that we impact the planet. And it's not good right now with industrial agriculture. It's not looking very good. So we're gonna get to what we're doing about this. But first I wanna have a pause, have you talk to the person next to you for just a couple minutes. Give them a minute, you take a minute. Where were your ancestors in this story, in this history, and how do you see your people connected to these past events that we discussed? Don't be shy, find someone new, talk to them. people. Free the land. By any means necessary. Can we please have 2 different people share out something that was alive for them in their conversation? Make sure you get consent from your partner if it's about their story. Yes, go ahead. Yeah, you.
Should I stand up? Can I sit down? I guess.
Yeah, sure. Stand up so we can see you.
Me first and then.
Thanks, Orion. Hi, everybody. My name is Denzel. Connecting our story here. So I'm a chef. I've been working professionally for about 6 years now. And within the last year, I began to intern at MoFat, the Museum of Food and Drink. They are a food culture museum. So for 6 years working in upscale and fine dining restaurants in New York City, I began to lose like a connection with my craft. You know, I fell in love with it beforehand, you know, but as time went on, I felt like I needed something more. I go to MoFat now to connect the dots, and I realized I didn't know anything about my culture, like my history. You know, I grew up in New York City, so it's like you're taught about history, you're not taught to connect with that history or your culture, and that was something really big missing for me. So within the last year, I began to expose myself to that. And coming here today, listening to you, it's like it's good. It's very enriching. You know, it provides me with something I can't get, which is being like an upscale restaurant, like the best named chef. It's something that I personally can connect with, and now through food, which is something that everyone has to eat every day, I'm able to connect and share that with other people as well. So yeah, that's my story.
My story is about something that was really important.
What is it? I gotta be really fast.
Okay. My story was about a school that was about to be like locked down, and the school was. One day there was a school that was new, and it had these like flashing lights and pictures of people, and then this man said, "This was the ground." And then the man put it down, so the kids had to work out.
I'm teaching Soraya about history now, so
Yeah.
I'm trying to retell a story from a book that we read called Granddaddy's Gift, actually, which interesting enough about the voters, right? So that's what she's trying to like tell you right now, which is.
Thank you. Let's give her a Let's have one more person share. Yeah.
My name's Shalina.
It's helpful.
My name's Shalina. It hit close to home because actually I had heard about, my great grandfather had a farm in the South. And I didn't know until like 1998 when I was speaking to my grandfather who passed away. But he, in passing, mentioned a farm. And he was like, because he saw what we had came home with one day. And he was just, why are you eating all this crap? And I was your age, I ate off the land, blah, blah, blah. We just over there rolling our eyes like, well, how'd you eat off the land? He was like, we had a farm. And we're just like, you had a farm? And my mom's like, yeah, he mentions it now and again, but like, I've never seen this farm. And he was like, yeah. And then he finally, like, right before he passed away, he told me, because he had a garden in Queens, in the backyard. He owned the house. And he used to grow cucumbers and tomatoes. And I was like, how did you learn how to do this? He finally sat me down. This was maybe 2 years before he passed away. I'm sorry, he was like, the only reason why you're alive today is because your grandfather, my father, ran. And he said that my uncles got killed trying to save the land, the farm. And he ran away. He ran up here. He met my grandmother who was Native American, and they ran up here. And they had my parents, well, my mom, who had me. And the only reason I'm actually standing here today is because they ran away from the land. only reason why he ran is because he lost all 3 of his brothers.
Wow.
He said he would have stayed, he would have fought, and his brother told him, his dying breath, run. So he told me that it's crazy because I was a chef for a while, and I love food, but I've always wondered, like, I actually went to community garden. I was always into growing it, but I never had the opportunity to do so until my chef took us to a greenhouse garden, like on top of a roof, and I saw it and I fell in love immediately. And he's like, you spend more time up here than in the kitchen, and it just reminded me of my grandfather. And we didn't even get along that well. We really didn't. But it's like just hearing this and like realizing that there's so much truth to what, because it was surreal when he was telling us his story, and I was like, that as a kid, that didn't really, it's a story. And then being an adult and seeing how all of it culminates in life and how you're affected by it in life and not being able to get loans for stuff, and you realize like you want to be open, you want to like believe that the world's getting better, but then it doesn't get better by you sitting still hoping that it does. So I want to be more proactive in helping that. So yeah, thank you so much.
I'd like to dedicate this evening to your grandfather's 3 brothers, to their legacy. And you teed us up so perfectly because the problems can seem really big, right? And so why not just roll over and die? Why not just give up? And there's a beautiful teaching in the Talmud, which is a Jewish text, sacred text, that says, while we are not obligated to complete the task, neither are we free to desist from it. If it took hundreds of years to create white supremacy and colonization, we should not expect, quarterly returns on our social justice work. We should expect generational returns. That means I have to trust in my children and my grandchildren to continue on the healing work. So I'm going to tell you a little about what we're doing at Soulfire, what we're doing with the National Black Food and Justice Alliance and other work, and how that builds on a legacy of resistance, because there is hope, right? We really believe that part of getting free does involve food and land, so that's why we do what we do. Soulfire is a black and brown-led community farm, and we follow a West African proverb, latte ete no noda, or 3 stones, and the cooking pot stands firm. So we have 3 corners to our organizing. Feeding folks, like real actual work, physical work, educational work, and reparations, movement building. So the first stone, feeding lands and people. We are on 80 acres that when we first arrived was eroded soil and cut down trees, sparse forest. And we spent 4 years putting in septic, electric, driveway, well, building a house out of straw bale, timber frame, building the soil back up from almost nothing to like feet deep, so that we could grow food for our community, so that we could provide doorstep delivery of fresh, healthy food. Every Wednesday, 400 people get a box, right, that is filled with vegetables, meat, eggs, fruits, herbs, all culturally relevant foods, and it's at a sliding scale. So people pay what they can afford. No one is kicked out for lack of funds, and people who are new Americans and people who have an incarcerated loved one get a free share that's subsidized by their neighbors to welcome them into the community. So that's our Ujamaa farm share. This is what your box looks like. It's beautiful. And we live in an area where there's not even there's no public transportation, there's no grocery stores, there's no supermarkets. It's truly food apartheid. So this is often the only fresh thing that people are getting. But I want to point out that we didn't come up with this idea of like feeding our community as a means of resistance. So all of these things we're doing are rooted in a legacy, right? And Ujamaa Farm Share, one of the places it's rooted is here. What is this?
Black Panther Free Breakfast.
Black Panther Free Breakfast Program, feeding 20,000 children every morning in Oakland. So yes, the Black Panthers did armed self-defense, but most of their time was spent driving elders to their appointments, running clinics, providing free groceries, providing breakfast, right? Visiting people in prison. So these type of survival programs is what we group everything on, because you don't get fed on theory, right? You don't get out of prison on theory. You need to do real things, and then you can also do theoretical things, but the real things are foundational. And all of our growing practices came out of those seed braids. The crops, The raised beds, the cover cropping, the no-till, the heavy mulching, those are African indigenous techniques, and they make the earth better. When Europeans got to the United States, the organic matter in the soil was 8, 9, 10%. That's good. That's the carbon in the soil, where it's supposed to be. After one generation, 28 years, that was cut in half, 3, 4%. That means that all that carbon, all that life in the soil went up into the atmosphere and became the first driver of anthropogenic climate change. Our organic matter is 12%. So we are calling the life back into the soil. We are calling that carbon back into the soil through these Afro-Indigenous techniques. Right? And it's not just physical techniques, it's spiritual techniques, right? I know folks who were here with me last night heard this story, but I was living in Ghana, West Africa, and the Queen Mothers there, who are like the guardians of morality in the community, always dressed super nice and always keeping everything correct. They're amazing. But I would go work with them because we did, like batik making and giving orphans jobs, all that kind of stuff. And they like to quiz me on what life is like in America. So one of their quizzes was like, Amidede, is it true that in the United States, people will put a seed into the ground and they will pour no libation? They will not pray, they will not sing, they will not even say thank you to the land, and they expect the seed to grow. Is that true? And I'm like, that's why y'all sick. You're spiritually sick, you're physically sick because you treat the earth like a material thing. You're not aware that there's anything bigger than you. You're not connected to magic or mystery or power or anything like that. Y'all don't even believe in God. What is wrong with you? They were just, no. So here we are, looking a little silly, but we're doing ceremony. We are singing, we are dancing, we're praying, we're holding festival, we're giving offering to the earth because she's actually alive and she has some things to share with us. And she would like some love in return, right? Again, this idea of treating the earth right, we didn't come up with that. Does anyone know this person?
George Washington Carver.
Dr. Carver, famous for the peanut, but why?
He recycled the cotton, the soil in the South was depleted because of cotton. And through crop rotation, Dr. Carver was able to restore all of the soil in the South.
Can you please come work on our farm? We have an opening for a teacher. So yes, Dr. Carver liked the peanut because the peanut is magical. It's a legume. It makes these little nodules on the roots, and it says, hey, soil bacteria, hey, rhizobial bacteria, come and live in this nice little nodule I made you. I'm going to give you some sugar, some safety, and in return, all you have to do is inhale nitrogen from the air and turn it into organic nitrogen for meat. And that's how soil gets healed. Dr. Carver knew this. He healed thousands of acres of depleted southern soil. He had compost going on in the South. You know, he was the father of organic agriculture, a whole generation before Rodale. And another professor at Tuskegee University in Alabama, Dr. Booker T. Watley. Black farmers were making no money, right? They were leaving the South. He stopped a lot of people from leaving the South with this really wacky idea. He's like, okay, this is what we're gonna do. We're not gonna grow cotton or tobacco, we're gonna grow vegetables and fruits. And we're gonna get city folk to come out to the farm and harvest. And they will pay you for the privilege to harvest. And I'm gonna call it, pick your own. Does anyone ever do that? Yeah. Right? And so he had a newsletter so people could feel connected to the farm, they had membership, all of that. And now it's so common, right? These CSAs and pick your own, all that. So we're very, very grateful for that. The second stone is training. You know, this comes out of the fact that we kept getting phone calls. We were only 1 year old. We got phone calls from people all around the country. Is it true that you can be black and farm in a rural space? Can I come there? Can I learn? Because I'm just encountering all these obstacles. So we created farmer training programs, Black Latinx farmers immersion, apprenticeships, youth programs, all different programs to train up that next generation of Black Indigenous farmers. And again, building on a legacy. Anyone know those folks? Yeah, Fannie Lou Hamer, very good. So Fannie Lou Hamer, Mama Hamer, my favorite quote of hers is, if you have 400 quarts of greens and gumbo soup canned for the winter, nobody can push you around or tell you what to do. So she did a lot of political organizing, but foundational was the survival program. She ran Freedom Farm, 70 families in Sunflower County, Mississippi. They had a housing co-op, they ran a farm, they had a pig bank where you could borrow pregnant livestock, get the pig, and put the pig back into the bank. They paid burial fees, scholarship fees, and she would gather all the activists into her house, and she would be like, if you don't have a garden, you're not a revolutionary, right? Because you're dependent on a system that hates you. And when that system crumbles, you're gonna be crying about it. So you actually have to have autonomy to really be a revolutionary. So she was about that life. Mama Sherrod, right? Shirley and Charles Sherrod started the first community land trust in the United States. They didn't believe in private property. They needed to own it together, just like our ancestors did. They traveled around the world learning about models of cooperative ownership, created the first land trust, 1969, 6,700 acres in Georgia, owned by 500 black families. You can imagine what happened next. White folks bombed them, shot into their offices, diluted their fertilizer. They became the lead plaintiffs in the Pigford case and got a settlement and actually restarted their farm, which to me is like, I would be like, you know what, I'm gonna retire. But no, they restarted their farm. And something I want to mention about these training programs is I was a little confused because I'm a scientist, and I've been trying to teach people about like cation exchange capacity, which is this amazing soil chemistry thing, or actinomyces and how you get them into the soil. And then in my evaluations, it would be like, I'm no longer addicted to cocaine. Or like, I left a toxic marriage, I left a dead-end job. And I'm like, what does it have to do with actinomyces? Like, what is going on? And I realized that getting back to the land, of course, is not just about producing food. It's also about healing a sacred connection that we need, that's a requirement. And science is catching up with this, right? You all read the studies about how if you eat dirt, it's like an antidepressant. Right? Because there's all this like beneficial bacteria, it produces serotonin in the brain. If you're like separated from dirt, you're depressed. Very interesting. But even on a spiritual level, in African cosmology, we know that the ancestors are under our feet. And they're living, and they are conscious, and they are cooperating, and they are advising. And so if we have contact, right, we're in touch with that belonging and that narrative. We're able to receive when we consider and pick up a handful of mycelium of like fungal hyphae. This is the superhighway of the forest superorganisms. So it's what shares sugars and minerals and warnings between the trees. So when we hold that, we are part of something bigger than ourselves. And I believe that we're suffering right now because while the land was the scene of the crime, she was never the criminal. And so we've confused that harm that took place there and believe that if we stoop, if we squat, if we sweat, if we get dirty, if there's bugs in our hair, that somehow we're in bondage, when actually the land is essential to our liberation and probably is part of what kept us going all that time, was the land, right? So there's this healing piece that's going on, and Harriet Tubman knew about that. She was making people eat herbal teas and like pray and talk to the trees and the ancestors that whole way up on the Underground Railroad. That's why she never lost a passenger. She knew that she needed the land and the spiritual aspect of the land to heal. So I'm gonna skip over our youth programs a little bit, and we can get there in the questions, and get to our third and final stone of our work, which is movement building. Y'all know that black farmers were the backbone of the civil rights movement? You know that. So I was talking to one of my elders, my best friend Amru Halfpenny, his dad, Donald Halfpenny. He was a Black Panther, he was very involved in the civil rights movement, and he would go down south and do the voter registration thing. And the black farmers were the ones who put everybody out, of course, because you couldn't stay in a hotel. They fed everybody. But they would have these like fake Bible studies, so that when you looked in the window, you would see Bibles, but inside the Bible was like the voter pamphlets. So they had these organizing meetings, like, but pretended they were church, right? And then they had lookouts, because usually one road coming in, and the night riders would come and want to kill the activists. So the black farmers would cut down trees to block the one road and give the people enough time to escape. And if they got caught, they used their land as collateral for bail money to get people out of jail. Like literally, there would be no civil rights movement without black farmers. So my elders were like, so what y'all doing? Just some farming? Like, to get with it, you need to offer more. So we've been more recently very, very engaged with regional and national work towards reparations. Because it's nice if you're trained to farm, but if you don't have any land, if the labor laws are not on your side, if you can't get credit, if you can't get capital, there's only so much we can do for our people. So we started doing some trainings. We formed a national reparations map. You can check it out, where Black and brown farmers put what they need, and you can contribute. So we've had 13 matches on the reparations map. We're also working on a regional land trust where we're collaborating with the Nipmuc, Wampanoag, Mohican, Schaghticoke, and Abenaki to create a land trust that is receiving reparations, donations of lands, as well as purchasing land on auction to redistribute amongst the community, communally owned, not individually owned. And then policy work and so forth. And of course, we didn't make that up either. Shout out to Cesar Chavez, Larry Eats Leon, Dolores Huerta, the Immokalee workers, right? Shout out to the Haitian Peasant movement for being at the forefront of the movement to resist genetically modified organisms and Monsanto, for burning that GMO seed, you know, like right as it comes into the port. For being the first free Black nation and able to defeat the biggest army in the world at the time in 1804. So again, this like resistance work, we're like building on what our ancestors have been up to. So we're gonna have time for Q&A and we're gonna have a closing poem. But before we get there, I just want to also encourage you all that we all can get involved in this. Like, who here eats? Cool. Who here lives on land? Okay, so this is our problem together, right? It isn't like a farmer thing over here and then we all just gonna like pretend that we don't have anything to do with it. It's all of us. And so one thing that's very, 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 very important is to not do the savior thing. If I want to work on veterans issues, who am I going to listen to about what needs to be done? Very good. If I want to work on issues of anti-Semitism, who should I listen to and figure out what needs to be done? Jewish people. If I want to work on ending racism in the food system, who should I be listening to? Folks of color, folks who are impacted, right? If I want to work on hunger issues, folks who are impacted. I need to listen to farm workers. I need to listen to Black farmers in the South who maybe aren't on Twitter. Right? So it's very, very important that we offer our resources, our time, our listening to frontlines organizations. That means organizations that are led by the people impacted, right? And educate ourselves. And we put together, about 500 farmers, put together action steps of how people can get involved. So you can check those out on our website, but some of it is about policy change, like there's a campaign to end junk food marketing in schools. You know, there's a campaign to get price supports for dairy farmers upstate so they don't have to go work in prisons instead, right? Like movement intersections. So there's a lot of ways to get involved that you should definitely check out. And some organizations, some amazing people that you can support. But in this moment, I'm going to actually pass it over to my beloved womb soul sister Naima to give us a poem to close out the presentation. Give it up for Leah!
Si se puede.
Si se puede.
Peace, y'all. My name is Naima. And I'm really honored to share this piece with you that I wrote for Farming While Black, inspired by all the teachings in the book, transmuted into a poem called Black Gold. I am evidence of love under fingernails, kneecaps stained from kneeling to pray, sacred remains of yesterday, fertile with future. I am musk after rain, soft, firm, unconditional embrace, bosom of returning. I am the earthen floor, slapped with souls of feet, origin story, and sorcery. I am vast and cosmic compost, sand, silt, stone, composition of decomposed bones and primordial ferns. I am sun, turned to rot. Particles of stardust heaped in terracotta pots, this thing the living clings to. Sorghum seed and black-eyed pea, nascent seedling, ancient tree. This melanin-rich thickness, dripping mineral and mystery. I am galactic blackness, hummus of fecundity. I am mud clung to cassava root in the lower holds of slave ships. The soggy clay that raised up sugarcane, fed cotton prophets of enslavement. I am arid trails, scorched with tears of dislocation. Earth snatched from Japanese farmers' grasp, thrust into concentration. I am raped by colonization, who changed his name to capitalism but retains the same enslavement. The erasure and breakage of all my relations for global market chocolate, whose row has faced starvation. I am the sweet smell of freedom. I am promised past plantation, the ground under Harriet's railroad, the cracks in pavement post-migration, that spawned the roots that pushed through shoots that subverted subjugation. I am loam, lush, with nitrogen from Dr. Carver's legume fields. I am the calcium in Black Panther's free breakfast meals. I am the cooperative acres Fannie Lou Hamer made real, the once toxic lots Hattie Carthen's garden plots healed. I am ashes of burned Monsanto seeds stamped under the feet of Haitian revolutionaries. I am flush with tomatoes from Taco Bell boycotts fertilized by the ferment of fruit Immokalee farmers left to rot. I am proof of life after death. I am dawning from decay, my belly of mass graves and my open palm spawned gardens. I am transmuter of toxins, cauldron of embryos, cradle of coffins, atmospheric alchemist sequestering carbon. I am dust, bleach, stripped, strained by purveyors of pipelines and mountaintop explosions, erosion of homelands dissolved to ocean, borderlands encroaching. I am choking. I am swept up and stepped upon, guzzled by the gluttonous. I am paradise paved over, poison drenched, drained of sustenance. I buttress monocultures of monopolies to feed cultures of injustices. I am cultivated by machete. I am defended by cutlass, silent utterance. I am thunderous. I am umber, ochre, saffron, sienna, crimson, cinnamon, cocoa, brown, and ebony. I am gold, gold, gold. You are soiled, filthy, black dirt, rich. You are soul, soul, soul. Take me in your palms. Breathe in my memory, remember me. Fall soft where you belong, my seed. I need you. The future depends on me.
Is that in the book?
Painting in the front and then poem in the back.
And Naeem was so good to me. I tried to write a poem like that, and I was like, "Keep 6." And she made up a poem. Are we standing?
I don't know. We can sit.
Thank you for that presentation. It was amazing. Hi everyone, I'm Raymond Kennedy, NYU Food Studies grad student, Fair Collective member, also community organizer in Brooklyn on a food co-op, worker owner at a worker-owned cooperative in Brooklyn. I do a lot of stuff. And so I'm very excited to share the stage with you today for some Q&A. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. So a lot of these are more practical, present moment oriented questions. So you talked about how, you can't feed people theory. So my first question is, how can we better connect Black farmers with Black consumers? Like, how do we get the food that is being grown to our people into these neighborhoods in an effective way?
Yes, is the answer to that. So there's a lot of Black farmers, particularly in the Southeast, who are pretty ignored by our movement communities,
maybe aren't on technology are having trouble finding markets because of the overt racism in the South. And we're not doing, except for Corbin Hill Food Project, which does a little bit, we're not doing a great job of making those connections. So I do believe that we need north-south food hubs and lines of transportation, and that's an area for social entrepreneurship for some amazing NYU grad student to come up with and create. And another question is from the audience, and that was a good question. If you could just explain the difference between a food desert and food apartheid, or like why food apartheid instead of food desert. This mic is cute. All right, so shout out to Mama Karen Washington of Rise and Root Farm and Black Urban Growers for correcting me, because the government calls it a food desert when you have a zip code that's low income as well as far from a supermarket. A desert, however, is a beautiful natural phenomenon. It's a biome, it belongs, right? Apartheid is a human-created system of segregation that relegates certain people to opulence and others to scarcity based on factors like skin color, race, ethnicity, and that's what we have. And we went through the history of redlining and dispossession and lending discrimination, so all of that has led to the fact that certain folks live in areas with hot Cheetos and other folks live in areas with juice bars. And for this next question, I want to bring gender into it, since we live in an intersectional world. How do you feel that your gender, your experience as a woman, impacts your relationship to the land, your food justice work, farming, your connection to history? Yeah, so there's really some amazing work right now in the trans GNC community around queer botany and around understanding the way that in nature there isn't a binary. In fact, in the plant kingdom, we call a perfect flower, a flower that has both pollen producing as well as seed producing parts. And it's an imperfect flower, that has that binary. And there's a lot of animals that are queer that can change sex. There's on National Geographic, a cardinal that was like male and female. And that's been really important to me because I don't identify on the binary, and most of the people in our collective don't, and can feel really boxed in by terms like lady or woman or man and all of that. And it's very affirming to see in nature the ways that the truth of that continuum, that complexity is reflected. And did not mean to do any misgendering. I think I more meant like moving through the world in this like female body in connection to like doing food justice work. And another question that I had is so you have this list of ways that people can like support and give time and resources, but a lot of us in this room are students, Black, Indigenous people of color. Maybe we don't have a lot of access to time and resources, but we still are very passionate about this and want to do something. So what are some ways that we in our like world, in this world, can support Black farmers, can support this movement? Yeah, that's so true. Like a lot of us are super stretched and it's hard to think about doing one more thing. I mean, perhaps one blessing about such a complex, all-pervasive problem is that there are many, many points of entry. So when we're part of an institution like a university, rather than thinking that our individual food choices are what need to shift, we can push the university to shift its purchasing policies and sign on to the Real Food Campaign or the Real Meals Campaign, so that they're committing to, getting their food from places that treat workers fairly and the earth fairly, and so we can sort of leverage that institutional power. But I think it also is in those small and personal moments. Like, among many things that inspire me about my sister, we were traveling in Haiti one time, and the first thing she does when we get there is like pull out this tiny little like Parmesan cheese shaker thing, like you see at a pizza place, it's empty, and put some mung beans in it and some water to make sprouts in the bedroom. And I was like, what? She's like, no, I need to be the fresh eat living, the eating. Anyone could do that, so I think there's these personal ways, political, as well as political ways that we can honor our own food sovereignty and push for that bigger community food sovereignty. And I always like to ask this question. or to like think about these things. So if there were no barriers, like no, we've achieved racial, gender, labor, economic, food justice, everything's good. What does the food system look like in that world?
Yay! We do that like Harper's thing again.
So, I mean, I think it's really about so much, but these three pillars, right? So if land is fairly distributed so that everyone has access and secure tenure to land and is able to build equity and have security on their land, right? If the people who, in terms of labor, if the people who are working the earth are treated with dignity and have living wages and rights and respect and aren't being chased out by ICE, right? And if the consumers, if all consumers have access to culturally appropriate, affordable, fresh, healthy food, right, in the areas where they live, you know, that's sort of how we've healed the structural piece. You know, because I lean on the spiritual side too, I really long for a time when all of us have returned and restored that sacred connection with earth. And it doesn't mean we all have to live in the woods, though you're welcome to come join me. In Haitian religion, we believe that every tree is a potomitan. It's a connector between the ancestor world and the sky beings. And when you touch a tree, when you interact with a tree, you're interacting with the wisdom of all of the worlds. And there's at least one tree right around us. And so my yearning is for us all to like look at a tree and be like, hey granddad, you know, hi sky beings, like I'm connected to something bigger.
Now we're going to open up to some live audience questions with this tiny microphone.
We have time for two. Yeah. Being directed. One over here.
So first of all, can we just give her a round of applause for setting this up? Like, this is super dope. So I just have two really quick questions. So I wanted to ask, first question, like, what is one book besides your book, which is definitely dope that I want to get, that you would recommend for everyone to read? And two, how did African like spirituality, traveling to Africa, and just outside of America in general, like open your mind to the possibilities of using, I guess, farming and just things that we don't think about in America to push you like forward, like in your movement?
So I would recommend the book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. It's an amazing book. She's a botanist, as well as a Potawatomi indigenous person. Just read it, Braiding Sweetgrass. And you know, I keep bringing my sister in, but when I was a very little girl and little person in the forest, we had a hard time. Like, kids at school were mean to us. We grew up in a white town, a lot of torture, a lot of bullying. And so we just went to the forest as a place of solace. And we ended up like building temples and singing songs and having this whole spirituality that we thought we invented. And so getting to travel to Ghana, to Haiti, to see that there actually is religion and that most people in the world do practice some kind of nature-based religion was so affirming to that intrinsic sense of what belonging looks like. And it's honestly given me the freedom and courage to just unfold into my whole being and not only show up as part of myself.
Okay, we're gonna do one more, maybe right here. Okay.
Greetings. Thank you again. My name is Akmos. You speak about you started off speaking about acknowledging our female ancestors and the path that they've laid. Could you speak more about like female energy or feminine principles and the importance of that in your work and getting back to the land, getting back to the earth? Feminine.
That's just feminine. Someone else want
Let's see. So what really resonates with me about that question is about motherhood. And I don't think that mothers have to be female, right? But I think motherhood is a sense of, I'm not here by me and for me only. In becoming a mother, I have 2 children. I remember the profundity of love that washed over my entire being as soon as I knew there was a child within me. It was like I thought I knew what love was, I thought I knew what life was all about, and suddenly I was welcomed in to the whole community of siblings on the planet. Every tree yearns to create a tree, right? Every wolf yearns to create youngsters. Like every flower, every seal, every breath that is taken of all of our non-human siblings is about sacrifice for that next generation. It's like, do you love your arm? Like, my arm is me. Do you love your child? My child is me. And it opened my heart to dissolving the boundary of self. And so I think what we have to learn from what you're saying about mothers and grandmothers is how do we dissolve our boundary of self, our ego, our individuality, so that we can love so much that without a thought, we would give over ourselves, right, to something that is sacred and precious and enduring.
Wow.
I'm supposed to say that was a great closing. I feel like we all just like received a lot of wisdom, and now we can like go forth.
Okay, so we want to save enough time to get books and talk more with Leah. Let's do another thank you for Leah.